I can do this all day. I can do this all day. I could do this all day.
Maladapted Automaton.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Maladapted Automaton, the show where I talk about film adaptations and from a variety of different sources. Anything from books, comic books, which is obviously this week, among other things. I am Nathaniel, and of course today I am dressed up as Captain America. It is 4th of July weekend when this will air, and so I thought, well, I'll do some patriotic stuff and do my Captain America thing. Got my shield. Shield's seen a little bit of damage. I think I can tilt the camera just slightly to show you. There's the one that's hanging on the ceiling there. I'm a lifelong Captain America fan. Anybody who knows me in real life knows that that's the case. Put this down now. Don't really need it. It just gets in the way. I don't know, Steve handles that stuff. That stuff is it's difficult. You can't see the whole damn thing, but I'm wearing the whole damn costume. I got it for Halloween last year of 2020, and I wanted to get some use out of it. Plus, you know, what lifelong fan of Captain America doesn't have? A Captain America costume. So, the movie we're talking about this week, there's a ton of Captain America adaptations. I almost wanted to start with like the 1940s serial or the 1990 one with J.D. Salinger, author J.D. Salinger's son Matthew playing the character, or the Red Brown ones, which are also fantastic from the late 70s. But ultimately, I chose to do Captain America: The First Avenger, the beginning of his journey in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You have to excuse me, this mask is really difficult. I might actually have to take it off midway through. It is extremely hot and sweaty in this costume. But Captain America: The First Avenger, which was directed by Mark Steven Johnson and written by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. I think I have that right. The two of them, they basically end up writing pretty much every appearance of Captain America in the MCU except for Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron, which are written by someone else that we're not going to talk about here. Maybe later we'll talk about him. But a little bit before we jump into that film and talk about what works and what doesn't work, of which there is both things that work and don't work. We're going to talk about the source adaptation, the source material a little bit. Now, Captain America was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby in 1941. It was the first book that it was published for Timely Comics, which would eventually become known as Marvel Comics years later. Someday I gotta get gloves for this costume. I don't know. He wears gloves. I should probably get gloves. But anyway, but yes. So Joe Simon and Jack Kirby created the character. Initially, he was of course, the background story is now infamous. It's used in this movie. Skinny little Steve Rogers really wants to be a soldier and go to fight World War II. Not allowed to because he's sickly and damaged, and they don't want him on the team. So he ends up attracting the attention of Professor Erskine, who turns him into Captain America using the super soldier serum and some Vita rays, and he becomes the Herculean ideal of a superhero. Goes on to fight World War II with the help of his pal Bucky, who was originally a 16-year-old kid who was just hanging around the military base. He finds out that Steve Rogers is Captain America, which originally he was sort of using the secret identity thing. That would quickly be dismissed probably when he came back in the 60s. But anyway, the character pretty much, he was introduced, obviously the first issue showed him punching Hitler in the face. And created by a couple of Jewish men who were obviously very concerned what was going on in the world. Cap was not the first patriotic hero. That actually was probably the Shield, who was a comic book character that comic book geeks probably have heard of, who was basically a guy who wore a complete bulletproof star-spangled outfit. He did get a little bit of a resurgence in the 90s at one point when they brought back all those old characters. I forget the name of the publisher. MKL? Something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, there was the Shield before there was Captain America. But he was originally created as a super American, and Joe Simon didn't like the idea, changed it to and said, well, Captain. There weren't many captains at the time in comics. Everybody was super though. So he said, well, we'll create Captain America. And he originally wanted two different artists to do it. I forget their names now, but they were referred to as the two Als. There was two guys that were going to do the art for the book. And Jack Kirby was a younger guy who really wanted the job, but he was originally going to be passed over, and he kind of got a little upset and was very insistent that he be allowed to draw the book. And it really, really began his career. Jack Kirby obviously is probably way more famous than Joe Simon. He's known as one of the king of comics, King Kirby. Ended up creating pretty much every major character in the Marvel Universe, alongside Stan Lee. You may be familiar with a lot of the arguments about, who was more influential, Stan Lee or Jack Kirby, with Lee getting a lot of credit for many years. It was probably more realistically probably a combination of, ultimately I don't think Jack really hated Stan the way I think some people think he did now. There was a lot of controversy there. Stan would eventually recant on it and say that he probably didn't give Jack his fair share of credit and kind of kept it all for himself. From what I've always been able to understand, really what seemed to happen was that Stan Lee was sort of the guy who would go out for the 4 martini lunches with like the executives, and he'd supposedly would write story ideas on a cocktail napkin and hand it to Jack, and Jack would run with it. But anyway, Stan would ultimately write the dialogue for the most part. Jack would write the story while drawing the book. But anyway, I mean, my favorite Jack Kirby story is always that supposedly he was in the bullpen at Marvel in the offices, and a couple of neo-Nazis in the 40s called up, and of course. Because, of course, at the time, literally, of course, World War II was actually happening. America has entered the war, which is why Captain America was created. He's very much a propaganda creation. I mean, let's be perfectly clear on that. He is designed to increase people's interest in the war effort. And in fact, he was very controversial when he was created. A lot of people didn't stand for what Captain America stand for. There was people who weren't super thrilled that Cap was punching Nazis on the front cover of the first issue. But anyway, since anti-Semitic rhetoric had, of course, traveled to the United States in the wake of the Holocaust, surely that would never happen today. Yeah. But anyway, so basically some guys, they called up the office and told Jack Kirby to come on down to the lobby. They'd show him what would really happen if they met Captain America. Supposedly before the phone even got hung up, Jack Kirby was rolling up his sleeves and he is going down there to go punch Nazis in the face. That's who Jack Kirby was. He was a Jewish man. He was extremely patriotic. He was extremely believing in a stronger America of unity and peace. And it's actually kind of disgusting that certain hate groups that are online love to claim that Jack would be one of them. And it's disgusting. It really is upsetting that anybody would think that anybody who stood for hate would think that Jack Kirby would be on their team. He would not be. I don't know him. I never met him. But I've read his comic books, and I can tell you, he was making political statements right up through the end of his life in comic books. So I didn't want to get too into it. But certain hate groups who have come up to basically say that now modern comics are promoting the SJW agenda, because us SJWs were out there trying to take over the world, I guess, through any means necessary. We're Antifa. Ooh. Our invisible agenda. And let me make that clear. If there is an agenda, I'm not aware of it. I didn't get that memo. They didn't write that to me. So if you are in charge of that, hit me up. I'm in the book, so to speak. But anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, right, hate groups. Yes, of course. But anyway, there's a lot of really slimy ass people out there who claim today that comic books are specifically going for trying to score political points with the SJW agenda, and that it's killing comics, and that comics are not selling well. First of all, if you actually look at any actual sales figures, they're doing better than ever. And two, they claim that this is a new thing, that comic books are political now, but they weren't then. But you can go look at a Jack Kirby panel, a Fantastic Four, of the Thing. He's hanging out with Black Panther. He sees a segregated water fountain. He sees Black Panther see the segregated water fountain. The Thing then looks at the water fountain and smashes the colored only one and the sign that says colored only. And T'Challa, Black Panther, looks at him and says, "Thank you, Mr. Grimm." And the Thing says, "I didn't do it for you, but you're welcome anyway." And that's what Jack Kirby was about. He was like, that this is nuts. Racism is nuts. Anti-Semitism is nuts. And that's not what superheroes stand for. Stan Lee certainly didn't believe that either. He said that many times before his untimely death just a few years ago. So, but anyway, so Captain America, rant over. Let's get back to Cap. Captain America was, of course, he was created to be this thing, and Bucky was there. He spends most of his publication history in the 1940s fighting World War II. He's usually fighting Nazis, the Chinese, with some pretty cringeworthy stuff going on in there of presentation of Chinese people. He's running around with Bucky. He's fighting super criminals. He's occasionally fighting super criminals, but normally he's just fighting the war. Oh yeah, that's right, Stan Lee. Stan Lee did actually have a connection to Captain America earlier than bringing him into the Avengers in 1964, which is when Cap was brought back officially to become the leader of the Avengers, which we'll talk about in another episode. But Stan Lee actually wrote a text-only backup story for an early Captain America comic, which was actually, fun fact, the first time Captain America ever actually used his shield as a projectile weapon. So Stan did bring that iconic thing to Captain America. So that's pretty cool. The character would ultimately remain pretty much popular until shortly after the war. He hangs around sort of until about 1950. But after the war ended, his popularity kind of plummeted. And it would be about 14 years later when Stan Lee would be like, let's bring him back. And he actually wrote him into an issue of Fantastic Four where the Human Torch fought Captain America. And it turned out to actually be a supervillain called the Acrobat who was pretending to be Captain America. But the whole thing was actually secretly a test of Stan Lee wanting to see how people would respond to Captain America in the modern era. And so that's what he was brought back, and he's become, of course, one of the leader of the Avengers in many ways. He's become an enduring, popular character. What really brings him, of course, into the mainstream is tonight's movie, Captain America: The First Avenger. It's a messy film, for sure. For all of the Phase 1 Marvel Cinematic Universe films are a little bit, what's the word, clumsy, maybe? They're a little goofy. They don't really hit their stride until Avengers happens, and then I think everything after that, for the most part, with a few missteps, everything kind of coalesces there. This movie was the 5th film of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, having been preceded by Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, and Thor. Cap is introduced as his background story, a few retcons here and there, mostly in the sense of Bucky, but Bucky had already been retconned anyway. Bucky, played by Sebastian Stan, who would go on to become a major character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in his own right, was originally introduced as just Steve's buddy. But he was his best friend as a child versus being a teenager on the military base who was inexplicably put into a spangly costume and thrown into Normandy. Bullets fired at him. Cap had 2 shields, apparently. But that was comics back then. They had kids running around as super people. Getting shot at. Bucky and Robin. Poor kids. A lot of therapy needed there. But anyway, ultimately what would end up happening with Bucky in the comics was that Bucky and Cap would end up the villain Baron Zemo, who of course has recently also become an MCU character. The original Baron Zemo, the modern era Baron Zemo in the comics is actually that guy's grandson. There's 100 years of superhero history at this point in the Marvel universe. So you need a spotter. If you are getting into this at the beginning, if you want to just pick up a comic book right now, as I always say on the show, do the reading first. Do some background reading. You probably won't understand half of what's going on because there is literally almost nearly a century of comic book stories in the past. But Bucky actually would end up being killed off, but it turned out he wouldn't be dead. He would become the Winter Soldier. That's another movie. But anyway, in the comics, yes, they were on a missile. Bucky in order to save everyone, detonates the bomb midair. Cap is thrown into the English Channel and goes into suspended animation for a while until he's found years later to become a member of the Avengers. Bucky was presumed to be dead for 50 years. And then he comes back. So Ed Brubaker writes the Winter Soldier story, the very, very vaunted, the highly acclaimed Winter Soldier story that involves Bucky returning to be the Winter Soldier and becoming a character in his own right again. Bucky in this movie is one of those things I think is a little clumsy. We are established within our first act that they're best friends. They knew each other when they were kids. And they've known each other forever. Bucky's been kind of bailing him out of trouble because Steve's only 5'4", which, by the way, I'm 5'4". He's 90 pounds. I'm way over 90 pounds. But he's sickly, and he can't get into the military. Despite all of his efforts to get into the military, Bucky's shipping off to fight the war, and Steve just wants to do his part to help his fellow man. He believes in the mission, which becomes very much a thing, and is one of the things this film does best. But I'll get back to that after I finish talking about one of the weaknesses. I try to do these things like compliment sandwiches. Say something nice, say something critical, say something nice, say something critical. But in the case of a negative, the film's relationships suffer a little bit in the first Avenger, which, by the way, it was what was called overseas in many countries, despite the fact that the movie's about a guy named Captain America. But apparently that was enough. It's ugly. Anyway, yeah, it's weird things of foreign markets. Who knew? But the idea is that my idea is that the relationships between these characters are a little bit awkward and not fully fleshed. We understand that Bucky and Steve are pals. We get that. But then he's not mentioned again. He goes off to war and Steve becomes Captain America, and then all of a sudden it's not until Bucky is presumed dead and behind enemy lines that he's like, wait a minute, I remember I have a friend named Bucky. He never wrote to the guy, and there was no scene of the two of them kind of reuniting or talking to each other. It's just one of those things that this relationship feels kind of forced. It does get developed later, which is something I think you could criticize the entire MCU about. to be perfectly honest. The concept of apologies again. I'm literally dripping sweat in this mask. Please excuse me. It is 1.5 billion degrees in this mask, but I can't take it off now. I'm committed. But the idea, I don't do 2 takes. All right, so we'll just hang in there, and I don't dance either. So it's best basically just a grown man in pajamas talking to you about a superhero movie. Thank you for that. But anyway, so that relationship isn't quite there. The same thing with Peggy Carter, although with Peggy it's somewhat paid off. The character of Peggy Carter. By the way, a little another side tangent. Watch Agent Carter. I think it's on Disney Plus. I should have looked it up before I came on, before I recorded it. Great show, created by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. I don't think they were credited officially as head writers, but they were the creators and producers of the series. And it's a great show, furthering a great character in the name of in the character of Peggy Carter. But in this particular film, we don't. It's sort of paid off in the sense because, of course, obviously the movie ends with Steve waking up in modern era, and his first thought is, "I had a date." You know, it sort of pays off the fact that the entire relationship between Steve and Peggy are very much fraught with misunderstandings and missed opportunities, and so it's sort of paid off that relationship never really develops. But at the same time, it's a little bit. Even to the way all of that ended up, and someday we'll talk about Avengers Endgame. I've decided that if I'm going to whenever I cover Captain America movies, I will be wearing this costume, but I'm going to do them in chronological order. So the next time we do a Captain America, it'll be Avengers, which was his next appearance, and so on and so forth. But the notion of, but again, that relationship just doesn't seem to work. Ultimately, the way it ends, though. It still feels a little bit off to me. I don't. The big ultimate love story of Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter, I don't think ever really takes off. It makes for a good tear-jerking image at the end of Avengers Endgame, but did anybody really remember or care that he had this relationship with Peggy Carter? I mean, he literally made out with her like grandniece in Civil War, but they kind of sidestepped that. Whenever possible. It's never brought up again, but we'll talk more about that when I talk about Civil War. But Steve made out with a great grandniece, which is a little creepy. In the comics, actually in the comics, I don't think there was a Peggy Carter in the comics. It's just Sharon Carter. I think he knew Peggy Carter, but I don't know if there was a relationship there. I'd have to look it up. Cap's girlfriend was actually Betsy Ross, because subtle. In the comics, she actually became his partner briefly when Bucky didn't test well anymore with test audiences, I guess, marketing, and she became Miss America, I think. God, I probably should have looked that up. But anyway, Betsy Ross was his girlfriend in the comics, in the war. Other things that don't quite work. I mean, obviously, again, this movie, there's things about it, there are themes in this movie that I think are really, really poignant and powerful, but they're not really called attention to. And while I understand that sometimes you want these things to be subtle, but it's never really brought up. It is later, again, there's something else that, in Falcon and Winter Soldier, this is sort of brought up a little bit. But if you think about it, if you watch it, and it's a pretty normal thing to happen with superhero films in general, that the villain and hero, their journeys sort of parallel until they crisscross. At this point, the villain Red Skull, who's kind of wasted here. I mean, he's one of the most evil villains in all of comics, to the point where other villains don't like Red Skull because he's a Nazi. And even other villains are like, whoa, I'm evil, but racism? Really? Racism is awful. But anyway, the idea is that, and he's played by Hugo Weaving in this film, and he's kind of wasted. It's kind of unfortunate. And he's kind of quickly forgotten. He's another character that gets brought up again later in Infinity War, and they're like, and everybody went, oh, that's right, there was a Red Skull. But nobody really cared, I don't think. He just didn't really pop as a villain, which none of them did in the early MCU movies except for Loki. No, I mean, Abomination wasn't bad, but he was played by Tim Roth, professional villain. But yeah. Anyway, I digress. But my point is that there's this parallel going on of both sides are developing a weapon, ostensibly. The Red Skull is trying to use the Tesseract, which of course is, again, the MCU being really quite clever in establishing plot points for later movies, which of course is all they do now. It's kind of their purpose of existing now, is to set up the next film. And we'll talk about that sometime if I talk about WandaVision or Falcon Winter Soldier, how that's actually backfired, I think, in terms of criticism. But here, this was still an experiment. They didn't know this was going to work at the time. So there's a lot of experimental stuff going on, and I think that's why a lot of it kind of doesn't quite work as well as it should, because I don't think they were really knew what they were doing yet. They were trying to figure this all out. But I mean, originally, the story of the MCU was literally just the realization that Marvel still retained all the film rights to the Avengers characters, who were not A-list characters, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Avengers, but I mean, nobody was really sure Iron Man was going to make any money, nobody knew any of these were going to make money, so they did, and now they're a $1 billion franchise, where if one of them doesn't hit $1 billion, it's considered a failure. Things that work well. Oh, I didn't even finish my thought. I'm sorry. I'm probably dying of heat stroke. Literally dying of heat stroke right now. But it's sort of brought up again in Falcon and Winter Soldier, where they talk about the idea that it's interesting that what America is doing, that their weapon that's being developed is a super soldier, which is a very Aryan idea. This is very Nazi. We're going to create the Ubermensch, the Superman, who will take over the world. We're going to use them for peaceful applications, of course. But it's just this interesting. And then, Red Skull is developing an energy weapon, which is, of course, what America was doing in World War II, was obviously developing nuclear weapons to win, end up winning World War II, in tragic loss of innocent civilian life, of course. And I always feel a little bit weird referencing any sort of real life atrocity while wearing a Halloween costume, but there it is. But I mean, it's never really talked about. Again, it's brought up as one of the points of Falcon and Winter Soldier much later, that it's an awfully eugenics sort of based idea, the super soldier, the superior man. Best thing that this film has going for it is Chris Evans, of course, who plays Captain America. He's originally almost didn't take the role. He was very close to turning it down. He was talking to it, I guess, by Robert Downey Jr. and be like, "Yeah, do it." Supposedly, that's what Chris Evans has said in interviews, was that Robert Downey Jr. convinced him to do the role. He was really going to turn it down. Didn't think he was up for the challenge. The character was too big, and he proved it wrong. Funny story. And this will probably be one of the last things to say because I'm coming up on time. Way back when Chris Evans did the movie Sunshine, I was sitting watching that movie with a friend, and he plays kind of the team jerk in that movie. But there's a whole big scene where he has to dive into freezing water and to fix something on the spaceship. And he keeps coming back up, and they're like, "You're gonna die if you keep doing this." And he's like, "No, I have to do this because it's for the good of the human race, to save the world." And he's this kind of big, tough military guy. And I remember in that scene, I remember looking at my friend that I was sitting next to, and I said to her, I was like, "He should be Captain America." And I said it earlier in the film, I think, but it was that scene where I turned and said, "Seriously, he's Captain America." And she said, "You know what? I think you're right. I think he'd make a great Captain America." And so then years later, like, Chris Evans is going to do it. I'm like, what did I say? What did I say? I predicted this. Chris Evans is going to be Captain America, and he's going to be a great Captain America. And he was a great Captain America. I say was because he's not anymore. But he, and honestly, I'm actually hoping if he comes back for more, it's not he takes over the role of Captain America and in the modern era. I really hope it's just flashback tales of what's going on with him and Peggy Carter, like fighting communism in 1950, or I want to see Captain America in different. In fact, after I saw Endgame, my friend Kara, who saw the film with me, said she's like, I really hope we see, I want to see Cap in the Cold War. Like, I want to see like Captain America being Captain America throughout history. Like, and I'm like, I'm totally in agreement. So I mean, I hope that if he comes back for anything more than a cameo, which is what my prediction will be, is that if he ever does come back, it'll be either a time travel story or a Cap from the past or a Cap from an alternate reality will pop up. It would shock me. There's of course the rumors that the next big MCU movie is Secret Wars, and it would shock me if they didn't drive a dump truck full of money up to Chris Evans' house and get him to reprise the role briefly anyway. But I guess that's basically it. That's pretty much all my time. I hope this was educational and illuminating in some way, or entertaining, other than seeing a grown man dressed in a Halloween costume for 30 minutes. But check out Captain America: The First Avenger. It's on Disney+. Also, if you're into movie riffing like me, there is actually a really good riff tracks of Captain America: The First Avenger available on their website. I think it costs $3.99, $2.99. And it's just an audio commentary of you play over the movie, and they tell jokes if you're not familiar with the concept, and they joke about the movie. I will say with a little bit of a warning that it was recorded. It was still an early riff tracks recording, so there's a couple of jokes that are borderline homophobic. Riff tracks had since learned its lesson and doesn't do that anymore, but at the time there are a couple, and they're jarring. They're jarring to hear. They're not like extremely homophobic, but they're there, and it's always difficult to see. So be forewarned. If you are going to check out the movie with riff tracks, just be prepared for that, and maybe don't judge them too harshly. They get a lot better about it, and they apologize for it. But Captain America: The First Avenger, it is on Disney+. It's a great movie. It's awkward as hell sometimes. It's dopey. I remember some people one scene when Red Skull addresses the Hydra troops, and they all yell, "Oh, Hydra!" And like people were giggling in the audience. There's some goofiness going on. It's a little bit too earnest sometimes. But it has, and its action sequences are a little bit dizzying, or not exactly. It's super well done. The movie was also retroactively changed to a 3D format in certain shots so that it could be a 3D thing. Predominantly, when Cap throws his shield at the screen, it would come straight towards you. So there's some awkward stuff going on, and that's true of all the first Phase 1 MCU movies. But as always, I end the show with always saying, do the reading, do the research. There's a ton of great Captain America literature on Marvel, I think it's called Marvel Unlimited, which is an app you can get on your Android. You can read thousands of comics from history. You can read all of Cap's adventures from 1940s if you want to. Be forewarned there's racism in those. You can read, but you can also read up to, I think, 3-4 months ago, I think is usually their cutoff. But a lot of great Captain America stories on there. So check those out, do the reading. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I thank you very much for watching. And I always end with my sort of cribbed line from Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hell House, slightly paraphrased: "When you love, you are loved in return, and the rest is just confetti." Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time here on Maladapted Automaton.